Yes, Imam Sahib.
Brother Muzaffar is
What's the
once
program
again here.
today? Yes.
Last
I'm
time,
glad, yeah.
asked him to come. Muzaffar Clark and then Brother Bilal Robinson.
Bilal Robinson.
Robinson from Birmingham. Yes, together with. And Brother Finton Murphy. Finton Murphy
Yes.
from Leamington Spa. And Sister Juwaria, who comes from Germany.
Thank you. Hazur, I've got a question. I'm asking on behalf of a friend of mine, Mr. Sagir Ahmed, who's originally from Rahim Yar Khan in Punjab. And he would like to know, do you have any views on the resignation of President Nagari of Pakistan?
Those views have already been expressed by me during my Friday sermon. So he might have asked this question just before the Friday sermon. Did he?
No, he asked it today. I think he may have.
The news of the sermon has not reached him so far. In fact, different comments from Pakistan fully support my observation on President Nagari's resignation. And my desk is now piled up with all these comments from different intelligentsia of Pakistan, writers, religious, non-religious people. They all support my analysis of the situation. You should read that.
Thank you.
Please.
I've got a question. I was shocked to see Muslims were selling alcohol and selling pork. When I first became converted.
Correct.
Can you please elaborate on that?
In Jamaat India, we have taken a very stiff view of this. And it came to my notice once, many years ago, that many Ahmadis keep in their shops, pizza shops and grocery shops, etc., alcohol as well as the flesh of swine. So I took a very firm position against this. Immediately, I told the Jamaat to cease taking their share of contributions for the Jamaat and advised them to either sell off the whole joint or at least remove pork and wine from the shops, etc. Alcohol, all sorts of alcohol. Many responded, most in fact responded immediately, and there were a proportion among them who remained unresponsive. You didn't hurt them not to pay their chanda, perhaps they haven't paid it anyway. So after waiting for a few years, 2-3 years, admonishing them again and again, then I took a very stiff position of turning them out of the Jamaat and declaring then that after having given you so much time, having repeatedly conveyed to you the instructions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, we find no other way but to count you out of us after this. And this is a position as it stays. No Ahmadi who is a member of the Jamaat sells pork or deals in wine or alcohol in any form. Right? Thank you. Wa alaikum salam.
May I ask you about a verse from the Holy Quran, please?
Please do.
The verse is from Surah Yunus. May I read you the verse?
Would you please?
And Moses said, Our Lord, Thou hast bestowed upon Pharaoh and his chiefs embellishment and wealth in the present life, with the result, our Lord, that they are leading men astray from Thy path. our Lord destroy their riches and attack their hearts, and see that they are not going to believe until they see the grievous punishment.
From which surah is it taken? Surah
Yunus.
I would like the Imam Sahib to recite the same verses from a little bit before and read them on for a little afterwards, whereas we know exactly in which context it fits in.
So these are verses from Surah Yunus. I start reading from verse 88. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأوحينا إلى موسى وأخيه أن تبوأ لقومكما بمصر بيوتا واجعلوا بيوتكم قبلة وأقيموا الصلاة وبشر المؤمنين وقال موسى ربنا إنك آتيت فرعون وملأه زينة وأموالا في الحياة الدنيا ربنا ليضلوا عن سبيلك ربنا اطمس على أموالهم واشدد على قلوبهم فلا يؤمنوا حتى يروا العذاب الأليم قال قد أجيبت دعوتكما فاستقيما ولا تتبعان سبيل الذين لا يعلمون.
That's right. Now I understand the context in which he said. Would you kindly now frame the question, what you want to understand about it?
Well, in the following verse, it says, your prayer is accepted. So quickly the prayer is accepted. Therefore, the prayer is of great quality. Just my feeling. So therefore, I wanted to understand how the appropriateness of the attack on the heart of Pharaoh.
I don't know whether it's rightly translated or not, but it's not an attack on the heart. It's the hardening of the heart. One thing. And another thing is, God should stiffen, the prayer means God should stiffen his attitude regarding their hearts. So I'll explain this when I come to this, after I have commented on the previous and the second part. First of all, the prayers against the people are not permitted unless all that should have been done has already been done. In case of Moses, this prayer is at the end of the part when the 9 signs had already been shown to Pharaoh and his people. And each sign left them making excuses and marking time. They always prayed for a little time and they said, yes, we will seriously consider this sign from Allah, as you call it, but please remove it first. So whenever the punishment was removed or slackened, they started reverting to the same old habits of defying the signs of Allah and also treating the people of Israel with cruelty. 9 times it happened until there was no more. No more could be expected genuinely that another sort of sign would perhaps change their hearts. So Moses at that time must have been permitted by Allah to pray against them at last, finally, with no more respite. And this is exactly what the verse is saying. That now that it has become established that no sign can change their attitude towards God and godly signs, they will give birth to a generation who will also defy. So this is the time that I pray to you that stiffen your attitude further, give them no more respite. Washdud ala, what was the word?
Misala amwalihim washdud ala qulubihim.
Washdud ala qulubihim. Qulub is the ultimate seat of soul as it is understood in religion, but it does not mean this physical heart. In that sense, it is the final, ultimate decisive power which takes place somewhere in the mind, but in religious terminology and also in the terminology in the world in general, that last decision making is referred to heart. My heart has decided to this. Well, the heart does not decide itself. So it always refers in this context to the seat of judgment in the human mind. So there it is requested, prayed to Allah that their minds, their souls should be now treated with such firmness that they do not make any more dilly-dally. They must realize now that the time for forgiveness is over, and now God is going to treat them firmly. Does this answer your question, or you have something else in mind?
Thank you, Huzur. I think I can understand the intention.
Yes.
Now.
That's right. Next, please.
I would like to ask a question on behalf of a non-Muslim.
Please do.
And the question is introduced the following thing. It comes from this idea that every human being naturally dislikes sorrow. We long for joy, love and happiness. Each event should be an act of love, as it was on the day of creation, and so generates joy. All existence is composed solely of such events. But the question is then, that how comes that there should be even an illusion of sorrow? So sorrow is considered to be an illusion because it's not a creative power like the creation evolved out of love, joy and positive powers, but
Now,
not sorrow.
Muzaffar, have you understood the question clearly? Would you help me?
I will try, Huzur.
Please.
The question, I believe, is, we were discussing this earlier, the creation of the world was an act of joy and of love, and every human being should perform actions in a spirit of joy and of love, and in keeping with the purpose of creation, and there shouldn't even be an illusion
But what is the purpose of
unhappiness.
creation? That is the point.
Mm.
When already angels were created who did exactly the same things as she is referring to. Whenever they followed the command of God, they always did it with absolute faith in that command's goodness, and a sort of joy and happiness which cannot be defined in material terms, but spiritually, naturally, whenever a conscious being followed the command of God, which could not think of evil at all, that being must have been very happy at that moment in time. That should have been the reward of that something, and this is how the plan of things went on until man was created. So why should have man been created if he should have been created exactly like angels? Were not angels enough? So this is the point. What is the plan of things? Plan of things is different. Here, a creation of Allah is given the options to follow Him or not to follow Him, where everything earthly is made so attractive, everything apparently is made so beautiful, that you have to take your decision of not following God because of your attraction towards the earthly things. While faith tells you that ultimate happiness lies in your obedience to God. When this option is granted to this new creation, that is man, then whenever he does not follow God, sorrow results automatically. So sorrow is not the creation of God at all. Shadows are not created. Shadows are born out of lack of light. So Allah's will is light. The Quran is light. Whatever it tells is light. So if somebody hides behind an obstacle through which the light cannot pass to him, that is his life of ignorance and sorrow. And the sorrow, it becomes an inseparable part of worldly pursuits, and is born because of his own actions, not because of plans, Allah's plan. You have got the answer, I hope?
Thank you very much.
Yes, please. This I have developed in much more detail in the book which I have been talking about, which is now in the last moments of final details. Whenever Allah permits us to publish, I think very soon, these questions and many more similar questions have been fully dealt with in that book. Fine?
What will be the name of the book?
It will be Revelation, now rationality, revelation, and the part they play in leading to truth and knowledge. Something like this. So this is a very interesting subject which agitates the minds of the modern world in so many different areas. But the question remains the same. Can we be led to knowledge and truth merely by the agency of our own wisdom and rationality, or do we need guidance from God? Basically, this is a question which covers all the issues which are included in the book, right? This is one of those.
Yeah, over here.
Please.
So this next question is from a non-Ahmadi Muslim friend in the north of the country who watches MTA quite regularly.
Non-Ahmadi Muslim,
Yes.
right?
And he has sent in this question. He says that after listening to my elders, I have this feeling that there is a difference between a messenger and a prophet. The question he would like to ask is, what is that difference, if at all?
The difference is only that of the difference is only that of direction and no more. When he receives a message from God to be delivered to the mankind, then he is always a messenger. When he speaks of the future events, also he will receive the information of that from Allah, then he becomes a prophet. So the same person from one vantage point can be seen as a prophet, and from another vantage point can be seen as a messenger. There is no difference. And I have proved repeatedly with reference to the Quranic verses that all the messengers have to be prophets of God. But all prophets are not necessarily messengers. All messengers have to be prophets. That is 100% certain. But some prophets, in the ordinary sense, as the world knows prophecy, do prophesize with reference to their own revelations or dreams or sometimes intuitions, but they are not necessarily commissioned as prophets by Allah. So the common feature between both is commissioning. When Allah commissions some person to represent Him, He grants them both the positions, that of a messenger and of a prophet. right?
There's been a recent United Nations report on AIDS worldwide, the spread of AIDS. I've got some facts and figures. This was just broadcast on the BBC recently, and I wondered if you'd like to hear them before I ask my question.
I would like to hear you.
Thank you. A recent US AIDS report states that more than 30 million people in the world are now infected by HIV, the virus that can lead to AIDS, and that 1 in every 100 sexually active adults is infected with HIV. It says that 16,000 people become infected every day, and 90% live in developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And the question is it too late for the human species if HIV and AIDS continue to grow at such a rate, or is this epidemic God's way of shocking people to behave in a morally responsible way?
Again, the book we were referring to, in that I have a full chapter on AIDS. And I have proved, rationally that this aid, although predicted religiously, has its own rationale.
Right.
And within that, it can be proved that AIDS was the only ultimate consequences which world should have expected. Having defied the laws of nature as created by God, the world must have been punished by a sort of nemesis by Allah, in the same way as the townships of the people of Lot were destroyed. The philosophy which commands both is exactly the same. So this is the rationale, as I say, or do you pronounce it as rationale? As
Rationale.
rationale is right, yes. This connects both these two remote events. Why were the people of Lot wiped out of the face of the earth? Because they ignored the purpose for which the sex had pleasure, sense of pleasure. It was not for the sake of pleasure that God had created sexes. It was for the sake of sexes to continue to perform their function that God had provided pleasure to the sex. This is one of the areas on which I spoke on my Friday sermon with reference to Hazrat Masih Maud Islam. I was so happy to learn from one of his writings that this was exactly what I have been saying throughout last so many years. Hazrat Masih Maud Islam has analyzed that every pleasure we receive through 5 senses is not in fact the object. The 5 senses could not be sustained and promoted if a pleasure was not added to them. Then he comes to this question of sex and pleasure. Masih Maud Islam expounds that, visualize sex being born for the sake of preservation of species, but without any pleasure in sex. Even if today you find such a case, you will abhor sex. Why should you behave in a strange manner to another person and going through all this doldrum exercise? It is only for the sake of pleasure that you do it. Otherwise, it will be just, as I said, horrible to you. Why should you do this, all this, someone else? So that is why those who lose sense of taste or pleasure, they never let other person touch the other person. That is why nowadays there are so many cases in the courts that he raped a wife telling the court that my husband raped me. Why does she refer to that act as rape? Because she has lost sense of pleasure in that act with that husband. So it was a punishment, and Muslim Islam has specifically pointed out this, that the object is another thing, and the concomitant things which keep the object alive or keep the service to the object alive, that's a different thing. If you forget the object and pay your attention only to the concomitant measures for the survival of the object, then the purpose is lost. Then you lose raison d'etre of your own existence.
Because it is not anchored to the purpose for which it was created.
That was the only reason. It was no cruelty from Allah. That was the only logic. Why the townships of Lot and the people of the Lot, two townships, Gomorrah and Sodom, were destroyed. And the same message had to be repeated now, because the homosexuals, male and female, both want to enjoy the means to its attainment of an object, and work against that object, because sexuality cannot give birth to other new generations. So this had spread far and wide, and as a result there was a time either for God to be called an unjust God, who reacted rather harshly at the time of Lot, but did not react now, while the time demanded even more severe measures. So once I read an article by I think by some of the priests who belong to church, that if God does not punish us today for our sins, then the townships of Gomorrah and Sodom will rise again, and sort of, you didn't say they admonish, but they would reproach God. What was different from this and that? Why did you punish us? Why don't you punish these people today? I read this long ago.
So the people will cry out for justice.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I would come across that measure by God, which was an answer to that cry. So because most of the world takes these things easy, treats them as easy and ordinary things, because most of the modern countries, laws are promulgated which permit homosexuality in Christianity, in the church, in the ordained church, and in the army and other services, in politics. So these people had to be punished, and they don't know what they're bargaining for. In my opinion, I have written this in my book as well, that before the end of this century, people are going to see an epidemic of AIDS.
Judging by the figures, yes. And the UN report says it's the actual levels of infection are grossly underestimated.
You'll be surprised to read that. I based that only on prophecies. I had no idea whatsoever of the facts which are being collected by the specialists, but they correspond exactly to what I have predicted in the book, not based on my scientific observations, but based on my religious observations. Right?
It's true to say, though, that the epidemic had spread out well beyond the bounds of homosexuality. It's spread into...
I believe these facts are not liberal. They're more stringent than conservative. Because most of the people do not go to the collectors of facts. those agencies which collect facts. And most people hide these things. And because of that tendency, the aid is spreading even faster.
There's an additional point in the report says that the Europeans are under the impression, because the rates have dropped in European countries, that the problem is now mainly a third world country, but
Right.
really they're closing their eyes to the very, very high increasing incidence in Western countries,
right.
even though the proportion might have dropped slightly. But they're now closing their eyes to it and pretending that it's not their problem
That's
anymore.
right. That's correct. That's exactly what I think, sir. I think. Yes. Please.
Why do Sunni and Shia Muslims say that the Ahmadis are not Muslims? Can you please elaborate on that?
Have you ever read Shia literature against the Sunnis and how they are condemned, roundly condemned, to be non-Muslims? No. If you had read that, and if you have also read the Sunni literature, which condemns Shias as absolutely non-Muslims, no question of their being Muslim at all. And if you had read that literature in which all the Sunni sects declare each other to be non-Muslim, then this question should have taken a different form. Why, despite the fact that throughout 1300 years prior to Hazrat Mirza Sahib, they had been at each other's throat. They had been declaring each other most certainly out of the pale of Islam. Yet they have ganged up together against Ahmadiyyat alone. That should have been the question. First thing, if the question is born, it is born only after the conviction that they are all wrong. Because what right did they have to single out one sect and gang up with each other, knowing each other to be non-Muslim? So this attitude proves them all to be wrong, most certainly. The question arises whether that one is also wrong or not. These 72 are wrong altogether. One could possibly be right, could possibly be wrong. Now this has never happened before in the history of Islam, that despite declaring each other to be pakka kafir, meaning the most certain 100% pakka kafir, and nothing to do with Islam whatsoever, they have all joined forces against Ahmadiyyat and called them a hodgepodge of 72 sects which have joined forces against one single out, and ultimately threw it out of the pale to which they belong. Right? Now, could the one which has been thrown out be possibly right? Number one, I should remind you that Hazrat Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, while prophesying the future of Islam or the Muslim Ummah, once said among his company that my Ummah, my people, would follow the footsteps of the Jews. So much so closely, that like the Jewish Ummah were divided into 72 sects, so also my Ummah will be divided into 72 sects. All of them will be wrong, will be hell-bound, sort of. Their character will be hellish. All of them. Now, first, let's pause at that statement and consider the situation of the people of Israel just before Jesus Christ appeared. They had got divided into 72 sects, exactly as said by the Hadith, and all of them opposed Jesus. So they had to be wrong. The divine was sharpened into either this or that. The 72 who had said very grave, who had made grave allegations against each other prior to the appearance of Jesus, they got united. And united against Jesus, while prior to that they had never been united. And the simile became very clear. What Jesus created was the 73rd Jama'ah. It was not another sect. He created the 73rd Jama'ah. So, the whole Ummah of Moses were divided into two. 72 in one sort of bag, and one out of the bag. This is exactly what Rasulullah has predicted. He said they will be divided into 72 sects, and they will all be wrong except the 73rd, which will be a Jama'ah. So that Jama'ah has to be created by Jesus Christ or His second advent. This is exactly the position today. See? I hope you fully understand all the implications. Yes? I have elaborated this question more in many other areas where questions could possibly be raised, and I have countered those questions effectively, I hope. So you could come up, if you could be provided with a cassette where I have spoken at length on this issue, Imam Sahib will help you. And then you will read all the answers, or hear the answers at least. Thank you. Yes, please. Next.
Thank you, sir.
I'm so glad that you are reading the Quran with deep attention.
Yes, I do.
And you are pointing out at things which just you can't understand by yourself.
Yes.
I'm so happy. This is how religion should be taken seriously.
Thank you very much.
Please.
I have another question which also refers, in fact, to one verse, I think, in particular. And that is that when beatings occur in Islam, they occur in public and are witnessed. And I'm not sure myself what the benefits
Of these public meetings.
yes.
Beatings. You see, first of all, to punish someone in camera is against the demand of justice. When some decision is taken somewhere and somebody is punished privately, how would the people know that this was done openly and clearly? But to make the beating before everybody would also be tantamount to giving it over much publicity, which would not be nice. So Islam requires only a few people representing the society to come and witness these beatings so that the dictates of justice are fulfilled. Now this is an answer which is a formal answer to this question. If the beating itself is what is bothering you, then the question should be reframed. The way you put it, I think this is the answer.
May I say one
Please,
thing?
this is why I am opening the door for another question.
Thank you very much. Because I try to read the verses concerned very carefully. And I think I'm right in saying that a beating need not ever occur. So therefore, I think that in Islam it would be better if beatings never occurred.
This is what you
Yeah,
think, yes?
Yes. But so then I thought when they do occur, they occur in public.
That part I have already answered.
Yes. Yes.
But that is why I raised the first part myself.
Yes.
That should have come along with the question. Why beatings at all?
Yes, please, if you
That's
would.
right. Now, in this present context of moral situation all over the world, the beatings are unthinkable. Because we take sex so lightly that it has resulted in all this havoc and we will not notice it. Now when you pitch one against the other, then you will see the importance of beatings. That's one way of satisfying yourself. Would you rather have the well run into this towards the precipice of their own destruction, rather than a few among them be beaten and stopped so that the whole society has a deterrent effect on it? When you compare the pros and cons, it becomes so evident that the threat of beating on some person is working as a deterrent for the whole society. It is far better, in my opinion, for mankind to be punished as specimen punishment, by specimen punishment, rather than the whole society being punished. Punishment you cannot avoid, as I already proved in the case of AIDS. It's a nemesis from God which has to take place. So either opt for that occasional possible beating or opt for the total destruction of mankind. I think any sane man will opt for the first option. But that again is a very strange thing which people generally do not notice. This beating can occur only if four reliable people who have never told lies, at least no lies known of them to have been ever spoken, they witness together jointly that we have seen this act with their own eyes. Only then such judgment will become possible, whereby a person will be condemned to this beating. Now, it's in a strange way, it acts as obstruction to the spread of evil. If the evil spreads and you are not shy of that, if you take it lightly, then you can do it in public. Like people go on kissing each other, hugging each other, and on television you are even shown the acts of sex. Now this promotes the spread of sex to all the innocent people, children, etc., men, everybody. The whole society becomes corrupted. But if the threat of that punishment lay on you, then you will not be as easy as that in your acts of digression. You will most certainly take care of your privacy. Now this gives the advantage of people not really knowing what's happening, because the knowledge of the sex of others always promotes sex. That is why sometimes you see in the papers a demand for removing all the ads concerning cigarettes, etc., or in wherever there's some acts or plays are shown, smoking should not be shown. Why not? If it takes place, it should be shown. Apparently, But they know the deep-seated philosophy that when it is shown to the public, then many people who had no idea of smoking would get the pleasure of seeing that and will become addicted, and the smoking will spread. If smoking can spread through this means of public display, why should sex not? Much more so. So that punishment is conditional to 4 people getting together and watching this act, which seldom happens. So the act of punishment becomes very rare, while the threat of punishment is spread out throughout the society. Act of punishment becomes extremely rare, but at the same time, if it does not become that rare and is taking place in a manner that it could spring out of the 4 walls of privacy, jump out of the 4 walls of privacy, then such people do deserve that punishment. But all this was done at a time when the society was in general purified. With all the Islamic dictates on purity and segregation of sexes, with all these measures, if some defied that atmosphere of purity to such a degree, I think if you consider all these facts, it is impossible for you to feel any abhorrence towards that punishment.
Thank you.
I hope you will think over this.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Please.
My next question is,
Ulpan?
I'd like to know if humor is an attribute of God, and if there are examples of God displaying humor, maybe in verses of the Holy Quran.
Humor?
Humor.
Sense of humor.
In what sense humor attributes of God? I can't
He
understand.
wants to find out, is humor an attribute of God? And if so, is there any example of that in the Holy Quran?
Humor can be taken in 2 ways. One, just an act which does not have any sense, only to make people laugh at some ridiculous thing. And humor sometimes has a more sinister quality when the humor leads to the realization that we had been wrong. So humor in that sense has been repeatedly mentioned in the Holy Quran. Zuq innaka antal azizul kareem. You consider yourself noble and dignified and also powerful. Now this debasing punishment, what is this? Taste of that dignity of yours. So it becomes an irony in this case. But in many verses of the Quran, it is below irony, a humor mixed with purpose. And this is exactly what we observe in the Holy Prophet himself as well. He had a sense of humor which was gained from his becoming a model for the whole world as a living symbol of the Quran. Once, for example, an old hag, a very old lady, approached him and said, "O Prophet of God, will I do this and do that and that. Will I go to heaven? Will I go to the paradise?" He said, "No, most certainly not, because no old woman will be admitted into the heavens." She didn't understand the humor in it. And she wailed and started going, "Oh, Sola, oh, what of it?" Immediately said, "No, please, don't worry. you will go to the heavens not as you are now. You will go to the heavens as the most wonderful, beautiful soul. So that is how the humor is employed in the Quran and in Hazrat Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, serving some purpose. And because he draws all his character from the attributes of God, so this is a sort of example how, an illustration how he did it, and what attributes of God might have made him to act as he did act at that time. He didn't mention any certain attributes, but I am just building the case overall. He was one man out of the whole world about whom Allah said, you act exactly as I want you to do. You never deviate from the path of my wishes. So this is the example how he acted. He acted.
I think that a lot of the humour of Allah Ta'ala lies in the language of the Holy Quran, the way that things are expressed and said. And when you read something, the most beautiful way of something is put, it makes you really think of how clever and wonderful.
It's spread all over the Quran.
Yes.
In a very refined way.
And I just wanted to know if it's really humor, because
Yes.
I've come across this and I just had
Yes,
to laugh.
that is
Or
what
if it's wrong in the translation.
And that is why humor is also employed very effectively in Hazrat Masih Islam literature against the enemies of Islam, and the non-Ahmadi mullahs against his concept of what Islam should be. He employs humor extensively, and on the speaking on that subject, he says, if humor helps you put yourself across in a better way, where people do not obstruct the passage to their soul and their heart and their mind, and the humor suddenly breaks those passages and the message goes across despite their efforts. He says, I always apply humor for this purpose, because when in a humorous mood, when you think of humor or hear of any humorous thing, you suddenly relax. And artificial obstructions which were created by you just go overboard, they're broken. And I have also employed it repeatedly in my argumentation with non-Ahmadi Muslims. When you talk about Jesus Christ, this is your view and this is how what should have happened to him. I have noticed many times non-Ahmadis, they just laugh, and that moment they know I was right and they were wrong. They could not laugh at their own serious views. They only laugh when they begin to see the ridiculous part of their faith. So the humor is implied in the Quran and in Hadith, by Rasulullah and by Masih Islam. And in the same way, I also imply humor. Perhaps more often than I should, but I can't help it.
I personally find it very refreshing when you do.
That's good. Very good. Please, next. Who is next?
I think it's back to me again.
Yes.
No problem. You have gotten what's happening.
This is an important question for new converts, really. It's a problem that I face myself. For many converts, it's easy to confuse culture with religion, and sometimes the cultural views confuse people's understanding of what Islam means.
Because your culture is confused with religion already. No fault of ours. The culture you call Christian culture is only partly Christian. And more often than not, it is non-Christian culture. So whenever Islam opposes some areas of your culture, they are always non-Christian areas, never Christian areas. And being non-Christian, they're wrong. they cannot be simultaneously followed along with the dictates of a divine teaching. Wherever they come into clash, only there they are condemned and proved to be wrong. But other things which are neutral, which are the right of every people, everywhere in the world, they are never touched by Islam or Ahmadiyyat as such, and they are never opposed. That is why I have repeatedly reminded Ahmadi Muslims living in UK, living in Africa, living anywhere in the world, that they should not unnecessarily become adversaries of those cultural values against which Islam does not say anything. But the Quran, in fact, promotes those values and reminds you that they should not be touched. The Holy Quran speaks of differences of languages, of colors, of this and that, and traditions. There, in fact, it approves of such differences. The language of difference of climate, of geographical placings, they all result automatically in a sort of culture. The people who live in a very cold, chilly climate, they cannot enjoy such games as are enjoyed in such climates which are very warm or which have both the elements. So they shape your extracurricular and extra-religious activities in the sense that they are influenced automatically by environments. Moreover, the economic status of a people also has its influence on culture. Wherever that influence is against set values of religion, only there we are asked, we are required to oppose that. In all other such areas, they are not opposed at all. So this is a question which has to be minutely observed and analyzed. Most often it is not analyzed, with the result that you create two sort of Muslims in the same country. While it is wrong, if you had properly attended this question, whether the Muslims living in England hail from Bangladesh or Pakistan or Africa, they should be molded into one society as far as the cultural values are concerned. They will follow the culture of this country in all the areas where that culture is not offensive to religion. They must follow. But where they are offensive to religion, they must not be followed, because they are offensive to their religion as well. Right?
Thank you.
We are left with 1 minute 654 seconds.
You're counting the...
Any question? Within that, can we divide now 56 seconds?
Yes.
You have a question?
Do animals have rights?
Beg your pardon?
Do animals have rights?
Of course.
Yes.
The Holy Quran is very clear on that, and Rasulullah SAW specially took objection to people who treated animals with cruelty, and even warned them with hell, that you will go to hell if you do not mend your ways and treat animals with cruelty. See? Thank you. All right, this is the last question, and as time takes by, I have to leave. Huh?